Oh, hi. How are you? Good. Can you turn your volume up? I can't hear very well. Okay, so you want me to start from the beginning? Okay, well, we only have an hour and it's been over a year of what's been happening in my case. So I don't think we're going to be able to cover. Okay. Great. That's a great place to start with services. Okay. First of all, I had started parent aid services, and my parent aid services were going fantastic. I was told at every scheduled visit that everything was good, everything was great. I was doing well, and I did my what are the not just the visits, but the what they do. They do like you do classes with them. Yeah, I was told that I was doing great and everything, wonderful. Obviously my child and I are very well bonded. We love each other very much, and at that time I explained to the parent aide what was happening in my case as far as the corruption and the reason, the retaliation and all that. But regardless, everything was great. We got to the midpoint meeting, and even my caseworker came and said, okay, well, it looks like the only spot you're deficient in is impulse control. And they tried to tell me that that was because of my online activity, that I wasn't able to control my impulses. Well, when I asked the parent aid services about that, they said no, impulse control goes only with your drug testing and to see whether you passed those or not. So they even called my therapist and told my therapist that I was having problems with impulse control. So that fell through. They weren't able to get anywhere on that. Of course, I documented all this via my emails. I asked them about it, and to no response. The next thing that happened was I guess that okay. Also, I'll talk a little slower. Okay. Right. They tried to tell my therapist. They got involved with my therapy to try to tell them because they're trying to stop me from being active vocally, and so they were actually manipulating my services start at that time, both parent aid and therapy, because what they did to manipulate my parent aid services was they actually canceled my visits because of the fact that I wore a yellow vest to and that's in discovery. That's in the court record. So the fact that I wore a yellow vest to one of my meetings, my visits were stopped. My visit was canceled the next day, which was a problem. And once they realized, well, they can't stop my visits because I wore a yellow vest, they've increasingly ramped up their intimidation tactics to me. So anyway, the parent aide actually quit her job and went on to work for DCS. So that's kind of a conflict right there in my case. Given that the next parent aid services came in and said, "Oh yeah, you're doing great. Everything's wonderful. You're doing fine. You're a wonderful parent. You're well bonded with your child. Everything looks good." And so at that point, services were about to end. I have it all documented in my emails. No, I'm not sure what the dates were. This was early on, within the first 6 months of my case. And so those services were about to expire, and my parent aide wanted to extend the services, the contract, so that, I could, they owed me hours. They owed me hours for canceling my visits. So they wanted to extend services. Well, that was denied. And then they tried to shove in all these extra visits so that they could close out services. And then they turned around and blamed me for not making those visits, which, I said, you can't just throw me a bunch of visits in there and expect me to be available for those. It was bad. So in the end, what happened was DCS filed a false document that said my services were unsuccessfully completed, when I had been told over 6 months of the course that I had been successful. They also tried to say that I was deficient in all the areas that they had in prior and at the midpoint said that I was efficient in. So that was some of the beginning of the problems in my case. They Oh yeah, I've done all the therapy that was required, and they've also claimed that that was unsuccessful. When I have certificates, and they're all on the record too, that prove that I completed those classes. I'm sorry, yes, through Taros and through Family Involvement Center, I did classes. But here's the thing, despite the fact that I was in attendance, I participated, I got my certificates, the whole narrative, the entire course of this case has been that I'm a flunky, that I haven't passed anything, that I haven't, I have failed at everything, which is absolutely not true. And how they get around that with Taros is they have something called Families First set up. So regardless of the fact whether or not I completed my classes, they just simply go through Families First and say, hey, we determined that she wasn't successful. And if you know anything about the lucrative contracting through the state, which I'm well versed in, I can tell you that there's a lot of collusion between these agencies and departments to do what DCS does best, and that is fraudulently have parents' rights severed. So that's what they've set themselves up for. I can explain to you again exactly why this is happening, based on the level of corruption I've uncovered. I'm sure in your 20 years of family law, you've probably heard a lot about it. The difference with me is I've done it publicly, and documented, recorded, reported, disseminated along the way. All right, so back to parent aid services being called unsuccessful. It's like making a sandwich. What the state does is they will build one lie on top of another lie on top of another lie. And in the end, what they present to the court is a completely false narrative of a parent that is actually very successful, very intelligent, and it just doesn't wash. But they've been allowed to get away with it for so long that it's no big deal to them. That's what they do. All right, so parent aid services did not end unsuccessfully, yet they were ended unsuccessfully. And let's see what happened next. What hasn't happened? Boy, they've buried me. I absolutely the whole time. Yep. I'm sorry, what was that? No, go ahead, because I think we covered I think we covered those services. Great. Oh, no, 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 no. Wait a minute. Back up just a second. I forgot. With Parent Aid Services, after they had decided that they were going to not extend my contract out with that company, what they did was they brought in a DCS case aid. And I said, I don't want a DCS case aid in my home because the state has a case against me, and I feel that this is just a way for the state to, falsify more reports and build their narrative of myself. That the case aide that did come into my home, um, she was she was very controlling, and she went beyond her boundaries of what a case aide can do. As far as she demanded that I leave the bathroom door open while she peed, and my child stood in front of her so that she could make sure that my child was safe. Mind you, this is after 6 months of me and my child having successful home visits with no issues like that. So when this case aide started telling me my child couldn't put makeup on in my home and she peed in front of her, I started videotaping. And at that point, my visit was stopped and my child was taken. This is about 10 minutes into the visit. Um, that resulted in a motion being filed to stop my visits. And, they couldn't find anything that I had done that was illegal. I did have to take the video down because I did post it online. And so I took the video down, but it doesn't, what happened then was my visits were stopped in my home and they were moved into therapeutic visitation. And that brings us into where we are now. The therapeutic visitation, first of all, the first thing I want to tell you about that is Exhibit C. The state has, okay, yes, was the false removal of my child in the first place. So anyway, uh, so we started with this therapeutic visitation, and as I don't sign anything, I refuse to sign anything with the therapeutic visitations regarding my rights to my parental rights, my free speech rights, any of my rights. That's something that I'm very strict on. I do not waive my rights by signing a piece of paper that is thrown in front of me, which has been attempted even at mediation to get me off of social media. Anyway, so I refused to sign the here, sign this, please. But what I did notice was the sign-in forms, just to prove that I was there, I suppose. They were DCS forms that said States Exhibit C on them. And so I used that opportunity to write about the corruption in my case on those forms. And the therapist physically threatened me by attempting to grab the phone out of my hand. He also told me that he would be stopping the visit if I continued. This was when they were video visits, mind you. My child was not in the room. He also said that the only thing that needed to go on those papers was my signature and nothing else. And so we had a kind of a really rocky few visits there. Um, right. And so what happened also in those therapeutic visitation at the very beginning was he had these activities that he wanted me and my child to participate in. Let me tell you about this first activity, which led to me doing no more activities. And I'll explain why in a minute. But what happened was his activity was, okay, Grace, take a piece of paper and draw a picture of your family. Mom, take a piece of paper and draw a picture of your family. And just prior to that, I had been given a picture that had been drawn by foster placement, not by my child, but by foster, by the placement. And they had drawn a picture of their family with Grace in them. And I actually have that picture. I have the original in my possession. And so when my child was asked to draw her family, guess what picture she drew? She drew the one that she had been coached to draw. Correct. Right. I caused some trouble with that. And I explained to the therapist, I said, I'm going to bring you next week. And I did the original picture. I said, I have that same picture at home. This was definite coaching. And so I said at that point, this is another way. This is another way that DCS builds their case against a parent. It's typical playbook tactics, and I'm not going to play that game. So he kept insisting, well, I have more activities. I have more activities. I said, look, I get to see my child 4 hours a week for a year. This is my 4 hours, and I'm going to spend it however I want with my child. And that's pretty much how it's been. The state doesn't like that. The state doesn't like that because obviously they've turned it into it's harmful, it's harmful, it's harmful because they haven't been able to silence me. I speak freely to my child. I answer her questions. They don't like the fact that I've told her the truth about what is happening in this case. That she knows she was abused in placement previously, and that's been covered up. The other thing is the Arizona Children's Association sent those records to my attorney, which they immediately pulled off the case. So I really need to have those records from the Arizona Children's Association of the time she was abused to be added to the record. I have a whole list of things that need to be added to the record that over the course of a year, my previous attorney denied me. She didn't find any of them relevant. And now the thing is, the timing's quite coincidental because now that I'm having this next criminal court hearing coming up and with a new attorney, it makes it very difficult for me to, get you caught up and get all this information to you and why it's relevant when I spent a year explaining the relevancy and who I wanted as witnesses and what my evidence was, which was never put up. It was only, oh, well, we will put up your certificates, but that's all. Nothing else is relevant, but it's all very relevant. The court's only getting the false narrative from the state. They're not getting the truth. And as a judge, you're supposed to use all relevant information to decide a case. And when that's not being put on that, then it's fraud on the court. But anyway, all right. So back to therapeutic visitations. I speak freely to my child. We are very bonded, and she asks me questions and I give her straightforward answers. The therapist has, repeatedly threatened to stop my visits, and I've repeatedly challenged him on that I've never signed away my rights, and that no, if my child's asking me questions, I'm going to give her an answer. She's in a dogmatic religious home right now, and I do not agree with their religion. I've brought this up over and over, that my rights to raise my child in the religion that I choose is being overlooked, and she's being fed dogmatic beliefs that are not in alignment with mine. So when the subject of God gets brought up, and it does a lot because she brings it up, being in that home. I do not know them. And so anyway, but I know because she's told me over and over and over about the religion and how it goes. And so, I've explained to her, I've had conversations about God with her. And when, when Satan came up, the therapist said, maybe you shouldn't talk to her about Satan. I said, well, so it's okay for me to talk about God, but not Satan? And he said, well, no, that's okay. Well, it just happened that the governor's name came up as well. And he specifically, the therapist told me that, okay, you can talk about God, you can talk about Satan, but you can't talk about Satan and the governor in the same sentence. So, my speech is definitely a problem for the state because my child has been made aware by me that what's happening is the state is taking her money, her survivor benefits, because her father is a deceased veteran, and so she kind of has a really good handle on the fact that children are being taken for Social Security benefits, and I haven't had a I don't talk to her at that level because she's only 8 years old, but I explained to her and at a level she can understand that what is happening, is that we are being separated because they're mad at me. The state's mad at me. They're acting out of retaliation. In my previous case, I had exposed my case worker as being involved via her husband in a high-profile felony child abuse case in Missouri. And the state got wind of that, and boy, they are after me now. I also, called out the governor and Cindy McCain and the director of DCS to their faces in a Human Trafficking Council meeting, which was on videotape, and they don't like that either. I also uncovered that those minute notes were altered to avoid an audit. So there's a lot of things that I've done outside of my case that have, over and over been said, you're not helping your case, you're not helping your case. But what's happening is I'm exposing it. I've exposed it, and they're in a lot of trouble. And so, they're doing anything and everything they can to quash it. I've been intimidated, threatened, harassed, coerced. At the last mediation I was at, they tried to get me to, the GAL said, let me make it very clear, the mother can never go on social media, and please sign here. And I said, I'm not signing here, and here's your affidavit. And I served everybody in the room with my affidavit. Have you seen my affidavit? Hello? Yeah. It's on the record. I served everybody in mediation with an affidavit, including my attorney, outlining the corruption, some of the corruption in my case, and how inside of the psychological evaluation, the caseworker had the psychologist put in the fact that I had harassed her, which is not true. There was never any charges. She was just mad at me for exposing her. Um, so there's some big problems with the psych eval. The other question, I think I ran this by you, was being I still don't have a hard copy of a license for that said psychologist. One of the things I've uncovered is not only is she possibly not licensed, but there's a man I know, his name is Dave Farnsworth. He's a state senator here in Arizona. He worked on the audit committee to audit the State Board of Psychology, and they did find that there's many, many complaints that have been buried, and the public is at risk because of court contracted psychologists. So there's just a lot at play, and I don't, like I said, over your 20 years, I don't know how well you are at the game, which is what my last attorney called it, but I'm very good at it. I've figured out just about every level. So, that's how it's going in therapy, is they're doing everything they can to stop my visits. I'm assuming that what they're doing is, well, first of all, my visits by the therapist have never been stopped, because I think he's at a point now where he understands. I've told him, if you stop my visits, you are violating your rights and you will be held accountable for this. So he's been reluctant to stop my visits, where the state, when they did their case aids, they have no problem at all stopping them. But he's, I think, a little concerned that, if I do this, then I am violating her rights. So instead, what the state did was they said, well, we'll just, we'll get foster care to say, oh, she's upset. Well, of course she's upset. She's separated from her mother, and she's learning the truth about her separation and why it's happening for money and who's involved. And so, yeah, that's upsetting. That would be upsetting. That should be upsetting. But it's right. So what they're doing is they're, of course, turning that into, spinning it into, well, Grace is upset after she sees her mom. Her mom is upsetting her. And so it's damaging her psychologically. No, my position is what's damaging her psychologically is the fraudulent separation. The state has also positioned themselves to hit that 15-month mark so they can swoop in with ASFA and just make sure that I probably don't even get a trial. In addition to the timing of the criminal charges, which have been inflated, which were previously dismissed. And, this is just another avenue that the state takes with parents in Arizona, is when we are vocal and we do have an audience and a following, is they like to throw us in jail or prison. And that's what's happening in my case. So, that's a different topic. So that's what's happening with me and the removal of my child, or the stoppage of my visits. They're thinking, well, we need to, it's like I said, it's like a sandwich. They do one thing, and then they build on it, and they build on it until at the end of your case, you're buried. So, next question. Since January, the case aide took my child illegally out of my home in the middle of a visit, which upset my child greatly. And the therapeutic visits started shortly after that. Of course, not much longer after that, we went into COVID, and so those visits were stopped on unconstitutionally, by the way, via an order from the DCS director to not let parents see their children anymore. They could only visit with them online, and of course, that turned into the narrative of the state saying, "Oh, the child doesn't enjoy talking on the phone to her mother." Well, what child would for 2 hours? The next thing after that was they decided, okay, she needs some more damage. So they decided instead of 4 hours a week, we're just going to cut that down to 2. They didn't tell the court that. My attorney didn't tell the court that. They just decided since they could, they would. So rather than my 4 hours a week, now I'm only getting 2 hours a week. Right. And then for a long time those were just video chats. And I'm telling you what happened with the video chats was, it was quite disturbing that the placement home would turn a movie on for the other kids and Grace, you got to go talk to your mom, you can't watch the movie, or we're going to go swimming, but Grace, you got to talk to your mom, you can't go swimming, or we're going to, go bike riding, but you can't go because you have to talk to your mom. Things like that. So, it's been a lot of manipulation, and Foster's also the ones that said, when Grace comes home, she's all upset. And I'll tell you what, though, during our visits, she's never upset because there's nothing to be upset about. We have conversations, and I tell her the truth, and yeah, it should be upsetting what's happening to her. Oh gosh, it's been over a month now. It was probably about the same time they filed the motion. Yeah, I'm sure. It was about the same time they filed the motion to stop the visits. They cut them down to 2. Oh, and also they after the video visits um were stopped and they went back to physical visits, they pulled something on me specifically, that Foster was concerned about COVID, so that Foster decided that we needed to go back to video chat. So it wasn't because of any other reason, but they're just trying to, limit my, and that all goes into parental alienation and what they're telling my child about me, and the narrative of, erasing mom. You must forget everything about your mother, and this is what they do. Their tactics. They've It's a well-oiled machine. They've done this for years, over hundreds of families, thousands of families, and they know what they're doing. In my case, it's most likely, too late. My previous attorney did tell me that I would not be getting my child back, and that my child would never know why. And so we definitely had some issues with that. And she's the one that mentioned that it was a game. And so that's why the OPA, I'm certain, took themselves off of my case completely. They did try to, get me to fire my attorney or get me to say she won't work with us and da 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 da, which is also typical. And I said, no, I said, it's not just you. It's the agenda of the OPA. I've been up Alistair Adele as well, and her corruption. And, like I said, I've studied hundreds of cases. I know how the defense works or how the defense doesn't work, in my case particularly. And they couldn't have that. So that's why I'm sure it got tossed over to your office. I'm not certain. I know you're a county office, so I'm assuming that you're under Alistair Adele as well. And I do know that in the criminal defense sector, there's some big, big, big problems over there as well as far as defense, but that's another day. Anyway, next. I can't hear you. I'm sorry. No, my child loves me. I love my child. We have wonderful visits. I bring snacks. We play games on the phone. We cuddle. It's the big problem is they don't like what I'm saying, and I claimed I have every right. And I don't sit there and badger my child. We have conversations. When she asks me something, I answer. I don't get into big long lectures about the government or my politics, although I do tell her what I'm doing. I do tell her that I'm an activist and I organize rallies and we are trying to save the children. That there's a lot of families that are being separated all over the world fraudulently, and that my job is to expose that. And she knows this, and these are things that the state doesn't like to hear, but this is the problem, is the secrecy has been going on for far too long. And if I do lose my child and if I do end up in jail or prison, at least I know that, I did my part to try to expose this, and I've done a fairly decent job. I've got the attention of, not just me, but me and a lot of other parents have gotten the attention to make real change in this state and across the country. We have organized rallies. We have started to make change. We brought a lot of awareness out, and every day we bring more. So I do have confidence that if my case, it's too late for me and my child, that the movement has started in a way that it's not going to be stopped now. There's too many people, too many good, sane, sober, intelligent, loving, caring, capable parents that are having their children ripped from them for money. And I know a lot of these parents personally. I don't know if you've heard these stories that come out of Arizona, but I know those moms, I know those dads, and I've shared their stories. And I would just ask that my child not be the next, because the state doesn't do well with keeping track of the children after they've bought them. So, just to make it clear, my position is this case is based on fraud. This case is based on retaliation, and I've well documented it. I have reported it to, once again, every level of government, and it's not going to go away. The state might do what they want to do to me out of retaliation, but it's going to end up coming back to bite them in the butt eventually, because my emails will never go away. They read like a book, and the state knows it. They've been following me online for over a year, trying to catch me in something they can throw contempt charge at me with. But I've been very careful. I've been able to raise awareness without